This program is part of the Devil's Mark Podcast Network, the official podcast network of Shadow Path Diabolism.
This is the Dark Illumination Report podcast episode for Wednesday, September 2nd, 2020. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about mental illness and spirituality.
This is the Dark Illumination Report podcast, the official podcast of Shadow Path Diabolism, your daily dose of Diabolonian philosophy to inspire you on your journey down the crooked shadow path. Here's your host, RJ Womack, Brother Nero.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for another episode of the podcast. As always, I'm RJ Womack, aka Brother Nero, and this is the Dark Illumination Report podcast, the podcast where we promote the religious worship of Satan and demons as a serious faith and way of life. And on today's episode, I'm going to be answering a question about mental illness. People often ask about mental illness as far as when it concerns Satanism, because it's one of those things where a lot of people suffer from mental illness and people don't take it seriously. And it doesn't really surprise me that they come to me and ask me questions about this subject, because if they go to the typical occultist out there, they're going to be told, oh, we don't deal with people with mental illness because somehow that makes them less of a person. And, you know, with all the people, with all of their attitude about being superior, beings and being living gods and all that, they wouldn't dare show any compassion for another human being. They wouldn't dare show respect for another human being suffering with a condition that they couldn't understand. They automatically assume they're not worthy or they're less than normal people or whatever they think. They're somehow less than them because they have mental illness. That's their attitude. So it doesn't surprise me that they're going to come to someone that's a little bit more open-minded. I believe that people, no matter what their condition, deserve ministry so long as they're not criminally violent and dangerous through their mental illness. If you're dangerous, that's a whole different issue. But if you're just dealing with mental illness, it doesn't mean you're not a spiritual person. It doesn't mean you're less than anybody else. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're not worthy of ministry. I mean, a true minister will serve his community and help them as best he can or she can. He won't look down on people. And in fact, I'm a strong believer in the idea that you absolutely must invite all serious people to Satan's house. You must be fair, you must be balanced, and you must welcome all people. I believe that's something that Satan teaches us. That's what I personally believe based on the religious experiences that I've had and based on the text that I believe in. I believe he commands us to do that. So I'm going to try to do that whenever possible. The only exception to that, however, is if somebody's dangerous or if somebody's going to do harm to me or the other people that I minister to. Other than that, I believe everybody deserves a chance to be ministered to and to be helped and to be respected. Now, one of the things about mental illness, and I've talked about this before on this podcast, is that mental illness and spiritual or paranormal events can be very hard to distinguish between, especially if you don't have the training to know the difference. And I certainly don't have the counseling training or the psychological training to be able to understand psychological conditions well enough to be able to distinguish, in most cases, when someone is suffering from a mental illness as opposed to a spiritual event, because they can mimic each other very closely and it can be very difficult to discern. But that does not mean that just because someone has mental illness, they're not having a spiritual experience, because I've seen cases of it. I think I've talked about it on this podcast before. I had a friend of mine who her mother is severely mentally ill, but she's also very psychic and has a lot of natural ability to see things and predict things. And people assume that because she's mentally ill, that she's not having truly spiritual experiences. But we've been able to prove that it's not true, because we had her say that she saw orbs on her shoulder, and that her brother, or her I think it was her brother and her mother, were on her shoulder, and they were sitting on her shoulder or next to her shoulder. And we took a picture with a camera just to see if anything would show up. And on both of her shoulders, there were orbs. So here's this person who is discredited and told that her opinion doesn't matter and that she's dismissed because she has mental illness. But yet we have pictures of her with orbs on her shoulders. So there's clearly something going on there, supernatural, as far as I'm concerned. And by the way, for those people who think that orbs are just dust particles, you're morons. That's all I got to tell you. You're absolute idiots, because I'm going to tell you dust particles and dust bunnies don't respond to commands, and they don't answer questions. And orbs can answer questions by getting brighter or dimmer or going forward or back or right or left. They can respond to requests for information. They can answer in an intelligent way. Dust bunnies don't do that. Dust particles don't do that. So if you want to believe that crap and you think you're intelligent, you think you're scientific, I'm going to tell you right now, you don't know what you're talking about if you believe that. You've never experienced true orbs or something. I don't know what to say. But anyway, I'm not going to get into the other aspects of the question I was asked right now. I'm going to save that for tomorrow's episode. But I just wanted to let you know that it is very difficult to determine what is mental illness and what is paranormal. And there are far more educated people on the subject of psychology and mental illness than me. So it would be very difficult for me to determine what the difference would be in many cases. It's one of the reasons why I don't like talking about the subject, because I don't feel I'm qualified to talk about the subject. And I don't want my advice to cause someone to do harm to themselves or harm to others, or to give them advice that would cause them to be in distress. I'm here trying to help people. I'm not trying to harm people, and I wouldn't want to do anything that would unknowingly push somebody over the edge. So I'm very reluctant to discuss issues like this. But I feel like on some level I have to, because if I don't, who's going to talk to them? Because in the occult community, there is a stigma attached to mental illness. And that stigma is, if you have mental illness, you don't deserve to be listened to. You don't deserve to be heard. Your spiritual experiences are invalid. It's all mental illness. And that's just simply not true. So again, I'm not surprised that people come to me, because they're certainly not going to go to a left-hand path occultist, because left-hand path occultists by their nature are very dismissive of anybody they consider to be weak or less than them, or less intelligent than them, or whatever their thought process is. I'm not saying that any of that's true about people with mental illness. I'm just saying that's the way they perceive the world. And so it doesn't surprise me that people come to me, because, as I said, who are they going to go to? Anyway, I'll talk about this further on tomorrow's episode. I hope it helps. Take care, everybody. May Satan be with you.
If you would like to learn more about the Shadow Path Diabolism tradition of occultism, go to rjwomack.com. That's rjwomack.com. If you enjoyed this podcast and support our message, tell a friend, leave us a review, and follow us on social media.